Welcome to the PDB Situation Report. Iran has made it clear that they're not backing down after the recent killing of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last month. Despite Western calls for restraint, Tehran appears to be standing firm, saying that they don't need anyone's permission to respond to what they see as an attack on their security. Now, the Iranian Foreign Ministry slammed European leaders for urging them not to strike Israel, stating that Iran is, quote, resolute in defending its interests. Reports also suggest that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has decided to hold off on an immediate response. And that's partly due, reportedly, to the urging of the country's newly elected president, Majid Sadeghpour, a man who's been labeled a moderate. But, well, you know, moderate, it's all relative. That report was later contradicted by U.S. and Israeli intelligence assessments that the regime could launch its attack as early as Thursday of this week. So the question is, what's really going on inside Iran? How are these tensions affecting Iranian society and politics? And in a general sense, what's the mood of the Iranian people? Look, we talk a lot about the Iranian leadership and the IRGC, but not much about the population in general. For that, I want to turn to Dr. Majid Sadeghpour. He's the political director for the Organization of Iranian American Communities. Doctor, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on the Situation Report.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's start with that very, very general question. And I want you to go with it wherever you want to on the playing field. From your perspective, what is the mood? What's the feeling of the Iranian people currently?
Well, Iranian people are in prison. They have been in prison without a border, essentially, for more than 4 decades. Iran today has the highest per capita execution rate in the world, and the regime is holding the entirety of the population in Iran, in excess of 85 million, hostage. And in order to perpetuate its killing and executions of the people of Iran, which, by the way, it needs for its survival. It also is perpetuating conflict outside of Iran, and unfortunately, we see the ramifications of it in the region right now. This all in addition to its nuclear weapons program and international terrorism beyond the Middle East. But the core vulnerability of this regime is really inside Iran. And to your point, the regime in Iran never has recovered from the 2022 uprisings that began in the latter part of summer of 2022. The Iranian people have been struggling against this regime tooth and nail for more than 4 decades. And the most recent one that began in 2022 never really ended. And the regime is in the middle of trying to eradicate those it arrested.
Eradicate, or is there any effort to? I apologize for interrupting, Doctor. But I'm interested in that idea of dealing with the Iranian population from the leadership's perspective. Do you get the sense that there was an effort to placate them by putting in the new president who, you know, everyone kind of immediately said, oh, he's a moderate. Isn't that interesting?
Right. And really, this is Pezeshkian is no moderate. He's a crony of the Ayatollah. It's really actually a marker of a dead-end regime that has no political future. With the death of Raisi, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei lost his protege and potential heir apparent. Pezeshkian is a Revolutionary Guards person. I remind your listeners and viewers that since Pezeshkian took office on the very day that everybody is worried about right now, on July 31st, 42 people, at least 42 people have been executed in Iran. And that today we are on the 13th day of August. And so this is an indication of a brutal individual and part and parcel of a regime that has been killing Iranians at a rate that has not been seen in years. Another indicator, for example, of the struggle between the people and the regime is really the reported executions in 2023. The actual numbers since October 7th, 2023 are really staggering. But the entirety of 2023, the regime is reported to have executed over 860 people. If that number is correct, which Amnesty International says is correct, that accounts for 74% of all global executions. Yet the country of Iran only has the 1% of the global population. And that should be mind-boggling for all of mankind, particularly for liberal democracies of the West. Because we have essentially ignored those executions and that astronomical number because we are preoccupied with Iran's proxies in the region. And so the regime is reaping the benefit of those proxies. It's distracting the West, is blackmailing the international community into silence. But those executions in Iran are really indicator of a vibrant resistance movement inside Iran that is threatening the survival of this regime. And that is the part that former Secretary of State Mark Pompeo calls the missing factor in American policy towards Iran. In other words, we have placed maximum pressure on Iran. We have removed the maximum pressure and engaged the regime in Iran. But all along, we have ignored the people of Iran and their organized resistance, which aims to overthrow this regime. That is what the people of Iran are dying at that rate for. They want to overthrow this regime. And the Ayatollahs have essentially handcuffed the West and occupied it with significant bloodshed in the region. That scenario has to change.
Do you think, from your perspective, does the regime imagine that they can execute their way out of this problem? Or, have you seen any indications at all in just the short time that the new president has been there, that they may try a slightly more moderate approach in terms of placating the population?
Right. No, unfortunately, there is no moderation in this regime. This regime is rotten to its core, is medieval in nature, is misogynist in nature. It will never reform. That is what the Iranian people are dying to tell us, that if they were going to reconcile with anyone, they would be reconciling with Muslim Iranians, much less infidel foreigners. And that said, the regime is really in weak standing. It is saber-rattling and terrorism in the region, and the executions in Iran have simultaneously gone up. It's a measure of the regime's weakness. It's fallen apart. It's fallen apart from within. The free world, as I must say, the United States Congress has said, must instead support the Iranian people's desire to overthrow this regime. That is what the people of Iran are dying for and are telling us they are able to accomplish. And in order for them to accomplish this, I can't tell you when it will be accomplished, but I can tell you it is not too far in the future. In order to accomplish this, a few things must occur. Within Iran, the conditions are already there. It is a highly oppressive regime that has curtailed people's rights, and people want those rights. And those people have an organized resistance capable of continuing their struggle, and that's why you're seeing the number of executions perpetually going up or remaining high. What is missing is the free world giving credence to that struggle. What is missing is the free world is engaging the Ayatollahs as if they are reformable. What is missing is the lack of accountability for these people's behavior within and outside of the Iranian border. If the international environment actually matches what the people of Iran want, which is to pressure the regime and engages the opposition, the regime will fall like a brick. The IRGC is incapable of containing 90 million population.
Talk to me, if you could, about the IRGC in terms of its alignment with the current regime, its importance to the regime in terms of maintaining power, and to what degree has the IRGC got their hands in the economy?
The economy is in turn essentially run by the IRGC. They have their own ports. They have their own way of feeding their own mechanism financially. They draw from multiple foundations that regime has set up. These foundations are fed also by the regime directly through budget and also through plundering and really stealing of the Iranian people's resources. You hear banks falling, all those assets are drawn into those foundations and into the IRGC. Most of the IRGC budget is not even visible, or its income visible to the Parliament of Iran to begin with. And so they report nearly directly to the supreme leader. So you can't do anything inside Iran at all without the IRGC's blessing. And so the regime is fully dependent on the IRGC. That's why we welcome the community designation of the IRGC, both in the US and more recently in Canada.
Do you make any, is there any credibility? There were some reports, personally, I think they were just optimistic and not particularly grounded in reality. But there were some reports when the new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, came in that the IRGC was unhappy perhaps with his placement, that they did, again, this concept of being a moderate, and that there is some daylight between he and his government that he's trying to establish and the IRGC. Right. Do you see any credibility in any of that?
I think the regime has played the good guy, bad guy scenario, good cop, bad cop scenario within its apparatus as times demand in its relationship with the West. And we have kind of bought into that. The regime is a fully militarized regime, and whoever they bring in as a president is predetermined, not selected by the people of Iran at all. And so, yes, that there are differences within factions of the regime, and that's what I was referring to. This regime is weak and vulnerable. It is reported that these vulnerabilities enabled some of the activities that we have seen in recent days, particularly on July 31st. And so we got to remember that this regime is fighting the people of Iran day in and day out. Its end game is survival, and if it is possible, expansion. But the primary goal of this regime at this point is survival. So it's willing to do anything. It's willing to kill at enormous rates. It's willing to sacrifice the Palestinian people. It is willing to sacrifice and cause bloodshed across the region. By God, they are even willing to welcome a World War III as long as they remain in power. And their behavior suggests that they will engage the enemies of the West to their benefit. They will kill the Iranian people in perpetuity as long as they remain in power. The free world must flip the switch. It should engage the people of Iran and their organized resistance. And I keep saying organized resistance. And it is led by the National People Resistance of Iran. Its leader is a Muslim woman, Raisi. That is a resistance movement that has been in existence for more than 4 decades, fighting this regime, and the people of Iran today are really echoing the chants that these people began making in the early 1980s. Down with dictator, be it the Shah or the current leader, meaning that the people of Iran do not want single-party rule of dictatorship of the monarchy, nor the dictatorship of these ayatollahs. They want a Jeffersonian republic, and that's what they're fighting for, and that's what they're dying for. And our job here in the United States is to engage members of Congress to make sure American policy at least acknowledges their right to overthrow this regime. That is all that's needed. There is no need for American funds or soldiers to be deployed to the region to bring democracy to Iran. Those boots are already on the ground. All we need to do is recognize their plight, recognize the legitimacy of that struggle to overthrow this regime. Let's just say it. Let us recognize their right to regime change, but not from afar, not Iraqi-style regime change, the kind that they would do themselves. They're the ones who are going to have to fight the IRGC. They are fighting them now, but they don't enjoy the legitimacy they deserve.
Yeah, I apologize for interrupting, but I mean, I would say that look, we've gone through several generations now and a number of U.S. administrations where this concept of, at some point there will be an uprising. At some point, the population will rise up in disgust with the oppressiveness of the regime. And yet we just keep going through, another decade, yes. and it doesn't happen. I want to pick up the conversation in just a minute. Dr. Sadikpur, stay right there if you wouldn't mind. We'll be right back after a quick break. Every day we hear more about surveillance and how our right to privacy is being infringed upon, and that's true. It feels like we're living in a world where, nothing is truly private anymore. Most of us, and frankly for the sake of convenience, we hand over our personal information without a second thought, signing up for services, shopping online, or using social media. But this convenience, as you might guess, comes at a cost. Now, it's time for us to take a stand and fight back for our right to privacy. And one tool that's been essential for me in this fight is the all-in-one privacy app called MySudo. That's MySudo, MySudo. It's an app that lets you create multiple digital identities with separate phone numbers and emails so you can keep your personal information private. In this age of constant surveillance, having MySudo is crucial. Look, for my listeners, I've got a special deal. Go to mysudo.com/Mike Baker and use code Mike Baker to get 30 days free on a Sudo Pro yearly subscription. Take back your privacy with MySudo. Trust me, it's worth it. Hey, if you're tired of the same old coffee from those mega corporations pushing, of course, their woke agendas, well, listen up. It's time to take a stand and support a brand that truly embodies American values. Of course, I'm talking about Blackout Coffee. Now, they stand with hardworking Americans who believe in family, faith, and freedom. They roast some of the most incredible coffee, it's delicious, frankly, you'll ever taste, using only premium-grade beans, roasted and shipped to you within 48 hours. Get what that means, right? 48 hours. They roast the beans, they put them in a package, they land on your porch, you put them in your mug, Bob's your uncle. For the cold brew fans, Blackout Coffee is now also excited to announce the launch of their 2 new ready-to-drink cold brew coffee latte options. Don't settle for less. Make the switch to Blackout Coffee. Head over to blackoutcoffee.com/PDB or use the code PDB for 20% off your first order. That's blackoutcoffee.com/PDB. And the code, of course, is PDB. Join the movement and taste the difference. Remember, with every sip, you're supporting a brand that stands for America. As we say around here, be awake, not woke. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Joining me again is Dr. Majid Sadeghpour. He's the political director for the Organization of Iranian American Communities. Doctor, thank you again for spending some time with us here on the Situation Report. This is a sort of topic that we could spend the best part of the day discussing, but we only have a few minutes left. We've been talking about the potential, I suppose, if you want to put it that way, for the Iranian population to assert themselves, to rise up. For that to happen, obviously, there needs to be international support. And without getting too political, I was hoping to get your perspective, your assessment of the current U.S. administration, the Biden administration's Iran policy over the past few years.
Of course. Well, before I run it back, I should answer your question directly. Well, the current policy in the United States is what it has been since the early 1980s. And that one that is actually in direct conflict with the wish and aspirations of the people of Iran. Let me explain. The U.S. policy towards Iran during the Bush administration, the Bush 1, Bush 2, Reagan administration, Clinton administration, and the current administration, and even the administration before the current administration, was all through different methods to compel the regime in Iran to change its behavior. Whereas during this same period, more than 4 decades, all of what Iranian people have been dying for, over 120,000 people over this period that have died, are struggling for something entirely different. They're struggling for regime change, not change in regime behavior. Because they were convinced after the first couple of years that this regime is incapable of change. And they've been dying at an enormous rate to tell us exactly that. And that is the message of the Iranian resistance. That is the message of the NCRI. That is the message of our community. That this regime must be changed, but not from afar, from within. And in order for that to occur, to your point, international community must hold the regime accountable, yes, but it also must engage the Iranian people through engaging their organized opposition, politically and morally. That is the missing factor in America's policy towards Iran. And until that changes, you will continue to see this pendulum of pressure and engagement, of dialogue of civilizations and such. But the regime never changes. They are who they are. Predatory vipers that will never lay an egg from which a dove will fly. That is essential translation of what Madame Rajavi has told us years ago, decades ago. This regime is irreformable in regardless of who they put as president or even as supreme leader.
Doctor, it's clear that there are those, right, inside Iran committed to seeing a change, right? Yes. But how would you, this is a tough question, I know, but in terms of the general population, how would you describe their attitude, right? I mean, because I suspect with the economic conditions being the way they are, that there are a lot of people, just like there are in a variety of countries around the world, that are basically just focused on trying to get by, right? And they're existing within a system that, and so the system may not be what they want, but they're, honestly, they're just trying to make it from one day to the next. Do you get the sense that a lot of the folks in Iran, and again, I know this is kind of a soft science question, but would you consider them resigned to the situation? Would you consider them pessimistic about the opportunity for change? No?
Opportunity,
Talk to me about
course,
that,
if they were resigned, why would there be so high on executions in Iran? Why would be enormous sized prisons across Iran? They killed 29 people over the past 4 days. If they were resigned, they would have just stayed silent. But they're fighting. The problem is not the willingness of the Iranian people to sacrifice for that change. The problem is the lack of engagement from the international community. Keep in mind, Europeans are still whining, dining across Tehran and hold embassies. It is the US that doesn't have an embassy, right? It's not just America's enemies that are holding the regime afloat. It is America's allies that is still to this day refuse to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization in Europe, right? So if that is the environment, what is the expectation of the people of Iran? Yeah. They are rising up. Let me run it back a little bit to 2017 when the administration in the US changed, right? The uprisings began in the latter part of 2017 before there was any mention, designation of the IRGC or the maximum pressure point. Uprisings continue.
What do you make of the? If I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm mindful of our time. I did want to ask you about your perception of the recent election, the voter turnout in particular. What was your assessment of that? The general numbers. What do you read into that?
Right. They've had two elections in this past year. One was the parliamentary elections, where Washington Post reported no more than 11% participated. That's astonishing. That's really tells you where people are. And this one was really not any better, right? And so what we're talking about is roughly 90% of the population not participating in an election, where your participation is required for participation in society. You have to, your national ID must be marked with participation, not yay or nay, but participation, to legitimize the veneer of republic for the regime. In order for you to get a job, in order to enter university, you need that participation marker. But people still are willing to part ways with their way of life, their income, their promotion, their potential contract, is still saying no to the regime in ways you might not notice. So the regime is totally illegitimate in all aspects. Even the United States government has acknowledged it. But yes, we still want to engage it to change its behavior, which is astonishing. That is what needs to change. The next people in the White House, whoever they are, must not only pressure the regime, but also include, as House Resolution 1148 says, in this session of Congress, with more than 220 original or 220 co-sponsors, is that we must support the Iranian people's, politically and morally, support the Iranian people's desire to overthrow this regime. If we were to do that, change in Iran will occur in near term. And we will all, to your point, live to see it.
Now, it's one thing to be, and we only have a short period of time left, it's one thing to be hopeful. It's another thing to be optimistic. And so I guess if we look at some of the indicators, Khamenei, the supreme leader, I believe is 85 years old. Do you feel as if a change there, once that happens, once Khamenei either dies or steps down, whatever, that presents an opportunity for a move for possible change?
Well, I can draw from the history. History tells us that medieval theocracies are weaker every generation, right? Every time they change leadership at the top. Khamenei is not nearly as powerful as his predecessor in Khomeini. Khomeini ordered the execution of more than 30,000 political prisoners in 1988 and got away with it. And this guy is crawling around killing Iranians at a much different rate, but it is much more weak. And his who comes after him will more than likely be a lot weaker than he is. But hopefully we will never get to that point. Hopefully this regime, I am very much optimistic to your point, that this regime will fall very shortly, should the United States and the free world lend their political and moral support to the people of Iran and their organized resistance.
Doctor, I do hope you're right. My feeling has been for a long time that there will be no short, mid, long-term peace in the Middle East, despite all the various negotiations and discussions that take place and potential ceasefires, as long as the current Iranian regime is in charge, along with the IRGC. So I appreciate you. Dr. Majid Sadeghpour, thank you very much, Political Director for the Organization of Iranian American Communities. We really appreciate your time, for your insight, your expertise, and I do hope you'll come back when we call you again.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Doctor. Well, that's all the time we have for on the PDB Situation Report. If you have any questions or comments, look, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. Everybody here at the PDB compound, which is essentially a secret lair underneath a dormant volcano, but you probably knew that. We all love getting your comments, your questions, your mail, your faxes, so keep them coming in. And to listen to the podcast of the show ad-free, well, you probably already know this as well, become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. And remember, of course, as if you could forget, new episodes of the PDB Situation Report. They air every Friday at 10 p.m. on the First TV. And, of course, on all podcast platforms and our YouTube channel, which is turning into a juggernaut, at President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, and until next time, you know the drill. Stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.